Welcome, my dear friend. Let everything slow. Of all the worlds the scattered prime marks landed on, Baal Secundus was among the least survivable. It is a moon of the planet Baal, in a system that had been prosperous once, long before the Age of Strife, and then ruined by a nuclear war so complete that the fallout has never cleared. The deserts there are radioactive. The rain, on the rare occasions it comes, carries poison down with it. The air corrodes lungs. What water exists sits in shallow toxic pools that kill anything that drinks its fill, and people live there. That is the part worth pausing on before anything else in this story. Human beings survived on that moon for thousands of years after the world that fed them stopped existing, in tribes, without medicine, without machinery, without any prospect of leaving, and they were still there when something fell out of the sky and landed among them. Tonight we begin with a dying world and the winged child who arrived on it. What the war left behind. The Baal system had been settled early in humanity's expansion into the stars, and it had been rich. Baal itself and its two moons, Baal Primus and Baal Secundus, supported cities and industry, and a population that had every reason to expect the future would resemble the past. Then came the Age of Strife, and with it the wars that ended nearly everything humanity had built. What happened in the Baal system was atomic, and it was thorough. The cities went. The industry went. The atmospheres of all three worlds were poisoned to a degree that made recovery impossible on any timescale a human population could wait out. What survived were people, and their survival came at a cost that shaped everything about them afterward. Mutation runs through every tribe on Baal Secundus. Radiation does not negotiate, and generations of exposure produced a population where variation from the human baseline is the norm, rather than the exception, and where the distinction between tribes who considered themselves still human and tribes who had drifted further became the organizing division of the whole moon. Those two groups warred, constantly, and for the oldest reason available. There was not enough of anything, and each side considered the other a threat to what little remained. The mutants raided. The purer tribes defended and raided back. This had been going on for so long that nobody on the moon remembered it beginning. The tribe called the Blood. Into this landed a gestation capsule containing an infant, thrown across the galaxy by the incident that scattered the Emperor's 20 sons from their creche on Terra. He was found by a tribe called the Blood, and the name predates him. They were among the purer strains, one of the groups still holding to the old human form, scratching a living out of a poisoned desert and fighting off the mutant bands that came for their water. What they found in the capsule was a baby with wings. Consider how that reads to people living where they lived. Every tribe on Baal Secundus had spent generations watching children born wrong. Extra limbs, missing limbs, growths, deformities of every description. The constant grinding evidence of what the radiation was doing to them. A winged infant, by every standard the Blood applied to themselves and their neighbors, was a mutant. The wings were the exact kind of thing they killed people for. They took him in anyway. The records do not preserve the argument that must have happened, but the outcome is known, and the outcome required a tribe defined by its hostility to mutation to look at the most obviously mutated child any of them had ever seen and decide to raise him to. They named him Sanguinius. The child who grew too fast. Primarch development did not resemble human childhood, and on Baal Secundus this became apparent almost at once. He grew at a rate the tribe had no framework for. Within a year he had the body and the capability of a young man. His wings grew with him until they were strong enough to carry him aloft over the desert. He could walk unprotected through the most poisonous stretches of the Baal Secundus wastes, where the tribe's own hunters needed coverings and could stay only briefly. He shattered boulders with the flat of his hand. Whatever weapon he was shown, he surpassed his teacher in its use within a short time. None of this frightened the blood into rejecting him. By every account, the reverse happened. The tribe took him as their own, and he took them as his, and the bond formed on both sides with a completeness that would shape his character permanently. That is worth marking against what other Primarchs found on their landing worlds. Angron woke into slavery and an arena. Conrad Kurzer woke alone in a ruin. Mortarion was raised by a tyrant who despised him. Sanguinius, alone among nearly all of them, was taken in by people who had every reason to cast him out and who chose to love him instead. Everything he became afterward runs back to that. The 100. The event that revealed what he was came when the mutants attacked. A wandering band surprised the tribe, and Sanguinius saw his people in danger, and something in him woke. The accounts put the number of attackers at over 100, and they put the number Sanguinius killed at all of them. The tribe had never seen him angry before. What they witnessed is described in terms that sit oddly against the rest of a story about a gentle figure. A blood rage overtaking him, his full Primarch strength coming awake for the first time, and a nimbus of light playing about his head as he fought. Both halves of that description matter, and this series will return to both. The light became the iconography, a winged figure with a halo, fighting to protect the people who took him in, is the image the Imperium would later build a great deal of art and theology around. The rage is the part the iconography leaves out. It appeared the very first time he fought in earnest, before the Emperor found him, before the Legion existed, before anything that could be blamed on the warp or on chaos, or on the events at Signus. It was in him on Baal Secundus, from the beginning, and it came awake when the people he loved were threatened. Hold that. It becomes the whole story. Or the Angel of Baal. What followed was a campaign rather than a coronation. Sanguinius took up the defense of the tribes, and then the unification of them. He led the pure strains against the mutant bands that had preyed on them for generations, and he won repeatedly, and his reputation spread across the moon ahead of him. The tribes of Baal Secundus began to consolidate under him, and the endless war that had defined the moon started, for the first time in living memory, to look like it might end. And then he did something that the histories record without much comment, and which deserves more. He stopped fighting the mutants and started bringing them in. Having won, having established that he could destroy them, Sanguinius extended terms instead. The mutant tribes were welcomed into the union he was building rather than exterminated. A society organized around the extermination of mutation, led by a winged man, was persuaded by that winged man to stop. By the time this was finished, Baal Secundus and its neighboring moon were unified under a single authority for the first time since the atomics fell. The population was mixed, mutant and pure together, and the wars were over. They called him the Angel. The cost of living there. Two features of Baal life entered the Legion's culture permanently, and both come from the conditions rather than from anything Sanguinius introduced. The first is blood. On a moon where clean water is nearly unobtainable, and the pools that exist are poisoned, blood is a resource. The tribes of Baal drank it, from their kills and from ritual sharing among themselves, and the practice was practical before it was ever ceremonial. It was one of the few liquids on Baal Secundus that could be relied on. The second is the burial rite. The blood laid their dead out under the sky and let the desert take them. And the traditions surrounding death on that moon were elaborate in inverse proportion to how much else the tribes owned. Poverty of every other kind concentrates ceremony into the few events that cannot be economized. When the 9th Legion was later founded on Baal, both practices came with it. The blood angels' blood rituals, the vials, the sanguinary priests and their chalices, all of it traces back to desert tribes drinking from their kills because there was nothing else to drink. The Imperium would later find those rituals disquieting. Baal found them ordinary. The ship in the sky. The Emperor's fleet arrived while Sanguinius was in the middle of a battle. The accounts describe the angel fighting when the ships appeared overhead, and describe the recognition as immediate on both sides. The Emperor knew what he was looking at. Sanguinius, by every account, knew as well, though no record explains how. There was no test, no contest of wills, no period of resistance. Of all the Primarch reunions, this one is among the least complicated. Sanguinius knelt and was raised up and accepted command of the 9th Legion that had been made from his own genetic material and had been waiting for him. Compare that to how the others went. Angron was taken by force off a mountainside where he had chosen to die. Lorga was made to kneel in the ashes of a city built to worship a man who did not want worship. Conrad Kurz came aboard with murder already in mind. Perturabo's reunion produced a resentment that lasted until the end of the heresy. Sanguinius went willingly, gladly, and without reservation, and he went carrying something he did not disclose. The Legion he inherited. The 9th Legion existed before Sanguinius reached it, and what it had been in those years is worth a moment, because the transformation was total. Legions raised on Terra before their Primarchs were found each developed a character of their own, shaped by whoever commanded them, and by the campaigns they were thrown into. The 9th had a reputation in that period, and it bore no resemblance to the one they carry now. They were regarded as reliable, disciplined, and unremarkable. Solid line troops. Nobody wrote poetry about them. Then their Primarch arrived, and within a generation they were something else entirely. Part of that was recruitment. Once the Legion took Baal as its homeworld, its intake came from the tribes of a poisoned moon. People raised in radioactive deserts, hardened by conditions that killed most of the children born into them, carrying the customs and the fatalism of a population that had survived the end of its own world. The Legion acquired Baal's culture wholesale, because the Legion became Baal, and part of it was Sanguinius himself. The 9th took his bearing, his manner, and his preoccupations. They became known across the Great Crusade for a quality no other legion cultivated. They made things: art, sculpture, poetry, music, illuminated work of a standard that Terra's own artisans acknowledged. A legion of genetically engineered killers spent its time between campaigns producing beautiful objects, because their father did, and because they were made from him. The Imperium found this endearing. It is worth noting what it indicates. A population that turns compulsively to beauty is often a population working hard at something, and the Blood Angels had a great deal to work at. The brother everyone trusted. Among the Primarchs, Sanguinius occupied a position none of the others held. The Great Crusade's command structure was a nest of rivalries. Perturabo resented Dawn. Russ and the Lion circled each other. Angron was barely governable. Kurz was feared by his own side. Lorgar's humiliation festered for decades. Guilliman and Horus each considered themselves the natural first among equals. Sanguinius was the one they all liked. He mediated. When two of his brothers reached an impasse, he was the one sent between them, and it worked often enough that the role became semi-official. He was widely spoken of as the Primarch most likely to be named War Master before the appointment went to Horus, and when it went to Horus instead, Sanguinius supported the decision without visible resentment and remained Horus's closest friend among the Primarchs. That friendship is the hinge on which the whole tragedy turns, and this series will come to what it cost. For now, the shape of it. The being who would die at Horus's hands loved him more than any of the others did, and had done since before either of them had any reason to suspect how it would end. It is the prophecy problem. One more thing belongs in the founding, because it separates Sanguinius from every other Primarch, and because it explains a good deal about how he behaved. He saw the future, not reliably, not on demand, and never in a form that let him act cleanly on what he saw. But the accounts are consistent that visions came to him, and that some of them were accurate. And what he saw from early on was his own death. The details vary between tellings, and the vision sharpened over the years, but the substance held. A golden hall, a battle he could not win, and an ending. He carried that from the Great Crusade onward, through the campaigns, through the friendships, through every triumph the Ninth Legion was celebrated for. Consider what that does to a person's conduct. A commander who knows he is going to die in a specific manner has two available responses: avoid the circumstances, or accept them and continue. Sanguinius chose the second, repeatedly, at each point where the choice presented itself, and the last of those choices took place on Terra, with the outcome already visible to him. The Imperium later built a religion partly around his death, and treated it as martyrdom. Martyrdom implies a surprise. What happened to Sanguinius was a decision made in advance and then honoured. What he took with him. Here is the fact that this entire 8-part story rests on, and it belongs at the end of the first night rather than later, because everything else is downstream of it. The red thirst was already there, not created at Signus Prime, not inflicted by chaos during the heresy, not a consequence of Sanguinius's death. Isolated cases of battle brothers succumbing appeared throughout the Great Crusade, long before anything went wrong, and Sanguinius himself suffered from it in a milder form. He knew, and when he understood what was in the gene seed, he felt responsible for the suffering of his sons and searched for a cure while keeping the Flaw secret from the rest of the Imperium, including the Emperor himself. Sit with the position that put him in. The most beloved of the Primarchs, the one every other legion respected, the one his brothers went to when they needed a mediator, spent the Great Crusade concealing a genetic defect in his own bloodline from his father, hunting privately for a remedy, and executing his own sons when they went too far. That last part is recorded. A warrior who had gone too far into it was sometimes put down by Sanguinius personally, an act he carried out with reluctance and carried out regardless, because the alternative was worse, and because he considered the fault his own. He was hiding it while the Crusade conquered a galaxy. He was still hiding it when the fleet turned toward a system called Signus. Sleep well. Tomorrow the Legion goes to Signus Prime, and the secret stops being a secret. The War Master sent his closest friend to a system called Signus, and told him there were Xenos there. The Nephilim, he said. a species that had overrun the Cygnus cluster, a trinary star system of 7 hive worlds and 15 industrialized moons, and subjugated the human population living on them. A cleansing operation. Straightforward work for a legion of the Nine's caliber. And Horus had every confidence in his brother. There were no Nephilim. There had never been any Nephilim. What waited in the Cygnus cluster was an army of demons assembled in advance, prepared specifically for the legion that was being sent toward it. And the purpose of the arrangement was not destruction, though destruction would have been acceptable. The purpose was conversion. Tonight the blood angels go to Signus Prime, and the thing Sanguinius had been hiding for a century stops being possible to hide. The bait. The cruelty of the trap is in the detail that most retellings skip, and it changes the whole complexion of what happened. The blood angels did not go reluctantly. They went at speed, and they went eagerly, because Horus had hinted that the key to their salvation might be within their grasp there. He knew about the Flaw. Of course he knew. Sanguinius had concealed it from the Emperor and from the Imperium at large, but Horus was the brother he was closest to, and somewhere in the long years of the Great Crusade, the War Master had learned what his friend was carrying, and he used it. The one thing Sanguinius wanted more than anything in the galaxy, the thing he had been searching for privately for decades, while executing his own sons when the search failed, was dangled in front of him as a reason to hurry toward a system full of demons that had been waiting for him. Sit with the design of that. Horus did not order Sanguinius to Signus. He offered him hope, and let the hope do the work, and the legion raced toward its own trap, carrying the belief that they might be about to be cured. What the fleet sailed into. The corruption started before anyone reached the planet. The Cygnus cluster had been given over to chaos entire, and its condition was apparent as soon as the fleet drew close. The word-bearers had done the preparatory work. They had sacrificed their own astropath to summon Kabanda, a bloodthirster of Khorne, and Horus had given that demon a single task, which was to kill Sanguinius. Kiris the Perverse, a greater demon of Slanesh, held the system itself, along with a device the accounts call the Ragefire, and a structure named the Cathedral of the Mark. Note the pairing, because it is deliberate. Khorne and Slanesh, the two powers whose mutual hatred this channel covered at length in another series, cooperating on a single operation. That collaboration is rare enough to be worth marking, and its target was one legion's particular weakness, a bloodlust that could feed either of them, in a bloodline that already carried the appetite. The psychic pressure hit the fleet before the guns did. Something released a shriek that staggered even the Astartes, and the mortal crews aboard the Blood Angels' vessels came apart entirely. Ordinary human beings, the servitors and ratings and armsmen who keep a warship running, began killing themselves and each other. The Legion's own psychers and the librarians who had been officially disbanded by the Emperor's edict at Nicaea, but who were still aboard, suffered visions of a screaming angel drenched in blood. The Legion had not yet made planetfall, and it was already bleeding. The whole Legion falls. What happened on the surface is the event that defines the Blood Angels for the next 10,000 years. Isolated cases of the Red Thirst had occurred throughout the Great Crusade. A brother here, a brother there, taken aside, dealt with quietly, mourned. What the Signus campaign produced was different in scale. For the first time, the entire Legion succumbed at once. The environment was engineered to produce precisely that. demon hordes in numbers no legion had faced, a landscape saturated with the warp, the rage fire feeding malignant energy into the whole planet, and 8 hours of desperate fighting withdrawals in the tunnels beneath one of the moons. Everything about Signus Prime was designed to push men who carried an appetite for blood into an environment that offered nothing else. It worked. The Blood Angels went into a rage that took them past command, past discipline, past recognition. They purged Signus Prime, and the purging was total, and it was carried out by warriors who were no longer directing themselves in any meaningful sense. The plains of the damned became a slaughterhouse, and the Legion did not come back to itself until every daemon and every cultist on the planet was dead, at which point the survivors stood among the bodies and understood what they had spent the battle being. The Angel and the Bloodthirster. Sanguinius met Kabanda as he advanced on Kyros's palace, and the demon rose to meet him, the colour of dried blood. Kabanda tried persuasion first. Khorne's servants are not usually associated with negotiation, and the fact that this one opened with an offer says something about the care that went into preparing the operation. The Bloodthirster attempted to bring Sanguinius over to the Blood God's cause, and in the course of taunting him, revealed what Horus was planning against the Emperor. That is how Sanguinius learned, not from a report, not from a brother, not from Terra, from a demon on a corrupted world, delivered as a taunt, in the middle of a battle Horus had arranged specifically to destroy him. He attacked. The first exchange went badly. Sanguinius wounded the demon, and was then cast down, his legs crushed by the coils of Kabanda's whip, and left on the ground unable to move. And then the demon did the thing that mattered. With the Primarch helpless and watching, Kabanda went through the Blood Angels. Over 500 of them died in front of their father while he lay there with broken legs, and the demon made sure he saw all of it, and summoned the Rage Fire's energies across the planet while he did. That image is worth holding, because it is the second time in 2 nights this story has arrived at the same place. On Baal Secundus, the rage woke in Sanguinius when the people he loved were in danger. On Signus Prime, a demon of Khorne worked out the same thing and used it as a weapon. What he did anyway. Sanguinius got up. His legs were broken. The accounts are consistent that he should not have been able to fight, and that the librarian's efforts had something to do with his recovery, and that he went back in regardless. He found Kiris the Perverse in the Cathedral of the Mark, holding First Captain Raldoron, and about to hand him to Kabanda for execution. Sanguinius threw his sword, pinned the greater demon of Slanesh to the wall with it, and then went at the Bloodthirster with nothing in his hands. He took Kabanda's axe away from him. He got the demon's own whip around his throat. He tore the wings off its back and threw it into the pit. Then he went back for Kyris and took its head. This is the single most celebrated feat of arms in the history of the 9th Legion, and the Imperium's art has never stopped depicting it. A winged figure, unarmed, dismantling a greater demon of Khorne with his hands. It is worth noting what the celebration leaves out. He did it in a state that the Legion around him was also in, on a planet designed to produce that state, against an enemy who had spent the entire battle trying to provoke that very state. Whether Sanguinius overcame the rage at Signus, or used it, is a question his own sons have argued about ever since. The offer. The fighting ended and the negotiation started, and this is the part of Signus Prime that hurts. Kyris, beaten but not yet destroyed, made Sanguinius an offer. If the Primarch would give himself to the Ragefire willingly, The Legion would be cured. The Flaw would be lifted. The thing Sanguinius had been hunting in secret for decades, the thing he blamed himself for, the thing he had killed his own sons over, would be resolved, and the price was himself. Consider what the demon understood about him to construct that offer. Not power, not immortality, not victory over Horus. It knew that the one lever available on Sanguinius was the suffering of his sons, and that he would trade himself for their relief without hesitating. He was going to take it. Everything about the man says he was going to take it. Meros took it instead. Meros, an apothecary of the 9th Legion, one of a small strike force that had somehow stayed clear of the Red Thirst while their entire legion was consumed by it, and who had fought through demon hordes to reach the cathedral. Meros gave himself to the Ragefire in his Primarch's place. What came out of the Ragefire was the Red Angel rather than a cured legion, a corrupted revenant, the figure the librarians and Sanguinius himself had been seeing in visions since before the fleet arrived, wearing Meros's shape and Meros's substance and serving something else entirely. And the last detail is the one that stays with people. Enough of Meros's consciousness remained inside it for him to be aware of what he had become. The thing told Sanguinius so, and then went into the pit and fled Signus, and it is still out there. An apothecary of the Blood Angels, a man whose entire function was to preserve his brothers, sacrificed himself to save his father, and was converted into a demon that knows it used to be him. The ones who did not fall. A detail from the campaign deserves separating out, because it is the only piece of good news on that planet, and because nobody has ever explained it. While the Legion went under, a small strike force did not. First Captain Ralderon, the apothecary Meros, and a handful of brothers with them stayed clear of the Red Thirst entirely, kept their minds, and used that clarity to fight their way into the Cathedral of the Mark, while everyone else was lost outside. No account establishes why. They were the same gene stock as every other Blood Angel on Signus Prime, in the same environment, under the same psychic pressure, and they held. The Legion has been chewing on that ever since, and the reason it matters is what it implies. If some Blood Angels could resist Signus, then the Flaw is not an absolute. Something separates a brother who goes under from a brother who holds, and nobody in 10,000 years of study has isolated what. That question turns up again in this series in the form of two individuals who hold the Black Rage in check when nothing should permit it. What Signus establishes early is that the exception exists. What the Legion told itself afterward. The immediate aftermath is the part that shapes chapter culture for the next 10 millennia, and it has less to do with demons than with what warriors say to each other after a bad night. The Blood Angels came back to themselves standing among corpses, not the corpses of an enemy they had defeated in good order, but the wreckage produced by a legion that had spent hours out of its own control. Every brother who woke up on the plains of the damned had to account for a stretch of time in which he had been something he did not recognize. There is no doctrine in the Imperium for that. The Astartes are conditioned against fear, against fatigue, against every ordinary weakness, and none of that conditioning is aimed at the specific problem of a soldier who cannot trust his own memory of a battle. What the Legion did instead was ritualize it. The elaborate observances the Blood Angels are known for, the vigils before battle, the chaplains watching each brother for signs, the ceremonies around blood and around death, all of it hardens into place in the years after Signus. A legion that had discovered it could lose itself, built an enormous scaffolding of ritual around the moment of losing, and underneath the ritual sits an assumption worth naming. the Blood Angels did not conclude that the Flaw could be beaten. They concluded that it could be watched for, contained, and given a dignified form when it arrived. Every custom they built from Signus onward is a management procedure rather than a cure. The War Master's accounting. One more angle before we leave Signus, and it belongs to the man who arranged it. Horus wanted the Blood Angels destroyed or turned. Neither happened, and the campaign is usually scored as a loss for him on that basis. But look at what he spent against what he came away with. He spent nothing. The demon host was not his to lose. The word-bearers supplied the ritual, and Kabanda was banished back to the warp rather than killed, which for a demon means an absence rather than an ending. No Sons of Horus fleet was committed. No traitor legion took casualties. And he got a Blood Angels Legion 500 warriors lighter, arriving at Terra having burned months on a diversion, carrying 500 fresh graves and a fresh certainty about their own nature. He got Sanguinius wounded badly enough to need recovery. He got the Legion's librarians strained to breaking by weeks of visions. Horus lost the objective and profited from the operation regardless. That pattern repeats across the whole heresy, and Signus Prime is the cleanest early example of it. The one thing he did not account for was what the failure would produce. A legion that has already survived the worst version of itself and knows it is harder to break at the second attempt. When the Blood Angels reached Terra, they arrived pre-broken, and there is a kind of resilience available to people who have already been to the bottom and come back. What they carried off that planet. The Signus cluster was cleared. A cyclonic warhead was used to destroy the Cathedral of the Mark and a substantial part of the continent around it, and the whole system was quarantined afterward and declared forever dead, ringed with warning beacons to keep any human vessel from ever going back. The Blood Angels left with three things they had not arrived with. They knew about Horus. Sanguinius now had the truth of the War Master's treachery, delivered by an enemy, in time to matter, and not in time to prevent anything. The Legion turned toward Terra, carrying knowledge no other loyalist force yet possessed. They knew about themselves. Whatever the Legion had told itself about the Flaw before Signus, the entire body of them had now been through it together at the same time, and had come out the other side with the memory intact. There was no longer any question of isolated cases or private shame. Every Blood Angel on that planet knew what he was capable of, because he had spent a battle doing it. And they were 500 brothers lighter, all of them killed within sight of a Primarch who could not stand up. Horus had wanted them destroyed or converted. He got neither, and the operation is usually filed as a failure on that basis. That accounting is too generous to Sanguinius and too kind to the outcome. The 9th Legion went to Signus Prime Hall and came back knowing something about itself that could not be unknown. On the way to a war, it now understood it was going to lose someone in. Sleep well. Tomorrow, the fleet turns toward Terra, and the Angel already knows how it ends. The Siege of Terra has been told on this channel twice. Once across the full span of the Horus heresy, and once in its own right, wall by wall, book by book. Tonight we tell none of that. Tonight we stand in one place and look at one man, because the siege from the 9th Legion's position is a different event from the siege's strategy. The walls, the drop pods, the Titan engagements, the vast accounting of who held what and for how long, all of that belongs to the other tellings. What belongs here is a Primarch who arrived on Terra already knowing how his part of it finished, and who spent the whole siege walking toward that ending on purpose. What he brought to Terra. The Blood Angels reached the solar system, having taken the long way round, delayed by Signus and by the Ruin Storm, arriving into a defense that had been preparing for years and was still not ready. Sanguinius was given command of a section of the palace defences, and what happened over the following months established the thing the Imperium remembers him for above every other quality. He was everywhere. Where a wall was failing, the angel arrived. Where a breach opened, he closed it. Where a section's commander fell and the line began to fold, a winged figure came down into the gap and the line held. Across a siege fought on a scale no one in the Imperium had a vocabulary for, Sanguinius functioned as the defence's emergency reserve, thrown wherever collapse was nearest. The arithmetic of that role is worth working through. A commander deployed to the point of greatest failure repeatedly over months is a commander being spent. Every intervention buys a section of wall and costs something out of the man doing the buying, and the accounts from that period describe a Sanguinius growing progressively more exhausted, more grim, and less able to conceal what he had been carrying since before the war began. The sons of the angel in the line. The Legion itself fought the siege in a manner that says a good deal about what Signus had done to them. They took the hardest assignments available, and their casualty figures reflect it. The Ninth had come to Terra knowing what they carried, and there is a pattern in how a force behaves when it believes its own existence is a problem to be spent, rather than preserved. The red thirst was present throughout. In a siege of that intensity, in an environment saturated with the warp, on a planet under sustained demonic assault, the conditions that had produced Signus were present in a milder and continuous form for months. Brothers went under. The Legion managed it the way it had learned to. Watch, identify, withdraw the afflicted, and use them where the losses would be worst regardless. What the Blood Angels did not do, at any point in the entire siege, was break. The Legion, that had lost itself entire on Signus Prime, held the line on Terra for the duration, which is the strongest single argument available against the idea that the Flaw makes them unreliable. The shape of that is worth marking. Their worst failure had already happened, years earlier, on someone else's schedule. Terra found them with the fear behind them. Sanguinius and Horus before. Everything about the ending depends on what these two had been to each other, and this series established it in part 1. Sanguinius was Horus's closest friend among the Primarchs. The War Master's appointment had gone to Horus over Sanguinius, and Sanguinius had supported it without resentment and remained close to him afterward. Of all the loyalist Primarchs, the one with the deepest personal attachment to the man now besieging Terra was the Angel, and Sanguinius had learned about the betrayal from a demon on Signus Prime, as a taunt, in the middle of a battle Horus had built to kill him. What that produced is worth stating plainly. Every other loyalist Primarch at Terra was fighting a traitor. Sanguinius was fighting someone he loved, who had used that love as the mechanism of an ambush, and who had done it years before Sanguinius had any way to know. The vision arriving. He had been seeing his own death since the Great Crusade, a golden hall, a battle he could not win, an ending. On Terra, the vision stopped being a possibility and started being a schedule. The details resolved as the siege progressed, and the accounts describe Sanguinius recognizing the circumstances as they assembled around him. The place, the conditions, the shape of what was coming. He knew what the summons to Horus's ship would mean before it arrived. He knew what walking onto the vengeful spirit meant, And this is where the whole 8-part story of this legion turns. So it is worth taking slowly. A man who sees his own death has 2 options. He can arrange his affairs to avoid the circumstances, which is available and reasonable, and which many people in the Imperium's history have done. Or he can walk into them. Sanguinius went, not in ignorance, not in the heat of a moment, not swept along by events. He understood what was on the other side of that teleport, and he stepped onto the pad anyway. And the reason he did is the reason his sons have spent 10,000 years unable to let him go. Why he went. The strategic reasoning is on record, and it is sound. Horus had lowered the void shields of his own flagship. It was an invitation and an obvious trap, and it was also the only opportunity anyone would get to reach the War Master in person. The Emperor intended to take it. Sanguinius went ahead of him, or with him, depending on which telling, into a ship configured entirely to destroy whoever entered it. Someone had to face Horus first. Sanguinius understood that the War Master, by that stage, was no longer something a Primarch could beat. He went in the knowledge that his function was to arrive, engage, and cost Horus something before he fell. And that is what happened. He fought Horus in the Golden Hall he had been seeing for decades, and by every account fought well beyond what should have been possible against a being that far gone. And he lost. What he bought with a loss is disputed in its specifics and consistent in its substance. The encounter cost Horus something. A wound, a moment, a crack in whatever was carrying him. When the Emperor arrived, the thing he faced was not quite what it had been an hour earlier. The angel's death was a willing sacrifice made to buy the Emperor time and to open a weakness in the War Master's armor, and that weakness mattered in what came after. The refusal. One detail from the confrontation belongs here more than anywhere else in this series. Horus offered him a way out. The specifics vary between accounts, and the substance is consistent. The War Master, facing the brother he had been closest to, made an offer rather than opening with a killing blow. Join, live, take a place in what comes next. Sanguinius said no. Consider the position from which that refusal was made. He was standing in the room from his own visions, facing the person he had loved most, with certain knowledge that saying no meant dying in the next few minutes, and with the additional knowledge that his legion carried a genetic flaw that made them susceptible to precisely the powers Horus was offering him a place among. He said no anyway, and then fought, and then died. 10,000 years of Blood Angel's ritual, imagery, theology, and grief traces back to that refusal rather than to the death itself. The death was foreseen, and the death was arranged for. The refusal was a choice made in the moment by a man who had every available excuse, and it is the last thing he did. What his sons felt. The Blood Angels were not present in that room. What happened to them is the strangest event in the whole of this story. Sanguinius' death produced a psychic imprint of such violence that it wrote itself into the gene seed of everyone descended from him. His murder was so ferocious and so psychically virulent that the emotional echo of it still moves through the blood of his genetic descendants 10,000 standard years later. Alone among all the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, the Blood Angels and their successors possess an intrinsic genetic awareness of their Primarch's final moments above Terra. Note what that means in practice, because it is worse than inheritance and worse than memory. His sons did not learn about his death. They received it, and they are still receiving it every generation, in men born 10 millennia after the event, who have never seen Terra, and who carry the last minutes of a battle they were not at. That inheritance has a name, and the Legion did not have a name for it yet on the day it happened. They would find one. The Legion that came out of the siege. The siege ended. Horus fell. The Emperor was carried to the Golden Throne, and the Imperium began the long process of becoming the thing it is now. The Blood Angels came out of it holding a body. Sanguinius was recovered, and what the Ninth Legion did with him afterward established the character of everything they became. He was interred rather than buried, placed in the fortress monastery on Baal, in a golden sarcophagus, kept rather than committed to the ground, and the chapter has maintained that vigil without interruption for 100 centuries. The Legion became a chapter under Guilliman's reforms, along with all the others, and spawned successors carrying the same gene seed and the same inheritance. Where the Blood Angels went, the Flaw went, and the successor chapters have been discovering that for 10,000 years. And in the years immediately after Terra, the chapter began to notice something in its brothers that had not been there before Sanguinius died. Warriors falling into a state that resembled the Red Thirst and was not the Red Thirst. Men who stopped recognizing their surroundings, who fought with a strength beyond their own, and who spoke while they fought, as though the year was still 014.M31, and the walls of the Imperial Palace were still standing. They were saying their father's words. Some of them were saying them in his voice. Kabanda comes back. One thread from the previous night reappears during the siege, and its return is the clearest evidence that the Blood Angels' war had a personal shape the other legions did not. Sanguinius had banished Kabanda into the warp on Signus Prime. Banishment is an absence rather than an ending, as this channel covered in the Chaos God series, and greater demons hold grudges across spans of time that make mortal vengeance look like a passing mood. The Bloodthirster came back for the Siege of Terra, and it came back for the Blood Angels specifically. Look at the position that put the Legion in. Every force on those walls was fighting Horus's army. The Ninth Legion was fighting Horus's army and a demon with a personal history, one that had already killed 500 of them in front of their father and had gone into the warp promising more. That relationship outlives everyone involved in it. Kabanda has continued to trouble the Blood Angels across the 10,000 years since, appearing at intervals in their history, and every appearance carries the same message. The thing that broke them at Signus is not finished with them, and it has time. The sarcophagus. What the chapter did with the body deserves its own section, because it explains a great deal about the culture that grew afterward. Sanguinius was neither committed to the ground nor surrendered to Terra. His sons carried him back to Baal and placed him in a golden sarcophagus within the fortress monastery, and the chapter has kept watch over him without interruption from that day to this one. There is a choice underneath that worth naming. A burial closes something. What the Blood Angels performed instead was an interment, a placing, a keeping, a body maintained rather than surrendered, in a chamber where his sons can and do go to sit with him. 10,000 years of Blood Angels have stood in front of that sarcophagus. Every chapter master since the heresy has taken up his duties in that room. New brothers are brought there. The chapter's most solemn observances are conducted in the presence of a corpse that has been kept rather than laid to rest, and the psychological consequence runs one way. A chapter that has never buried its founder has never completed its grief, and this one has structured its entire existence around not completing it. What the rest of the Imperium made of him. The last piece of the siege belongs to what happened afterward, in the wider Imperium, rather than on Baal. Sanguinius died in a manner the Imperium found useful. A winged figure, refusing a traitor's offer, choosing death in defense of the Emperor in a golden hall, in the last hours of the war that made the modern Imperium. There is no better raw material for a state religion, and the ecclesiarchy did not waste it. He became an angel in the theological sense rather than the descriptive one. Imperial iconography across 1,000,000 worlds carries his image, or images derived from his image, and much of the visual vocabulary the Imperial Creed uses for its sacred figures traces back to a mutant child raised by desert tribes on a poisoned moon. The Blood Angels have a complicated relationship with this. On one hand, their father is venerated across the galaxy, and the chapter's standing benefits from it in ways that are hard to overstate. On the other, the figure being venerated is a simplification, and they are the only people alive who know the rest of it. The Imperium worships the refusal and the sacrifice. It knows nothing about the century of secret searching, the sons he executed himself, the flaw he hid from his father, or the fact that he walked into that hall having already seen it. And it has no idea at all what he left in the blood of the men who came after him. The cost of being the reserve. One more accounting before we leave the siege, and it concerns the Legion rather than its Primarch. A force used as the defence's emergency reserve is a force that never gets a quiet sector. The Blood Angels were committed wherever the line was closest to breaking, over and over, for the duration. And the casualty figures that came out of that deployment pattern are among the worst any Loyalist Legion sustained on Terra. They lost brothers on walls that were going to fall regardless. They lost brothers holding gaps that existed because someone else's section had already collapsed. And they lost them in an environment where the warp pressure was continuous, which meant every engagement carried the additional risk of a brother going under mid-battle and having to be dealt with by the men beside him. The chapter's own records from the period are sparse, and the sparseness is probably the point. There are stretches of the siege where the 9th Legion's activity is recorded as a set of deployments and outcomes with almost nothing about what happened inside them. What survives instead is the ritual that grew afterward. The Blood Angels commemorate the siege in more detail and with more ceremony than almost any other chapter commemorates anything, and the observances are specific. Particular walls, particular hours, particular brothers. A chapter that wrote little at the time has spent 10,000 years remembering it out loud, and the reason for that is the subject of tomorrow night. They do not commemorate the siege because they choose to. They commemorate it because their own blood will not let the matter drop. Sleep well. Tomorrow we look at what he left in their blood. The Blood Angels call it the Flaw. Other chapters, when they discuss it at all, use the plural and speak of two conditions, the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. Both are correct. The Blood Angels' own warrior philosophers describe them as two sides of a single coin, one afflicting the mind and the other blighting the soul, and that framing is the one this part will follow. They are separate in their symptoms, separate in their origins, and separate in what they do to a man. And they arrive out of the same bloodline, in the same brothers, and the second one is nearly always announced by the first. Tonight we look at what Sanguinius left behind in the gene seed, and at the 10,000 years his sons have spent living inside it. What the gene seed does right. Start with the part that gets forgotten, because it is remarkable in its own right, and because it explains why nobody has ever seriously proposed retiring this bloodline. The Blood Angel's gene seed is capable of producing all 19 organ implants required to turn an ordinary man into a space marine. That sounds unremarkable until you know that many chapters cannot. Gene seed degrades across millennia, and a number of the Imperium's chapters have lost the ability to produce one or more of the standard implants, with consequences that shape everything about how they fight. The IX's line has held. 10,000 years after Sanguinius died, his gene seed still does the full work, and it has a second property that belongs to no other line. Blood angels live longer, substantially longer. It is not unusual for a blood angel to pass 1,000 years, and their chapter master at the time of this account has held his position for well over a millennium, which in any other chapter would be inconceivable. So the ledger is worth stating honestly before the rest of tonight. The bloodline that carries the Flaw also carries the finest surviving gene seed in the Imperium, and a lifespan no other Astartes gets. The price is on the other side of the page. The red thirst. The first condition is a hunger. Every blood angel experiences it. That is worth repeating because the chapter's public position has historically been more careful. The red thirst functions as a psychological need for human blood present in every son of Sanguinius, rather than as a disease some brothers catch, and in every successor chapter descended from him. The mechanics of it are strange, and they are documented. Blood angels have no nutritional requirement for blood. Their physiology does not need it. And a blood angel who abstains for long enough grows weaker regardless, and ages. The clearest evidence for that is a man this series will spend a whole night on. Chapter. Master Dante abstained from drinking blood for centuries as a matter of discipline, and over that time he developed wrinkled skin and white hair, the appearance of an elderly man in a body engineered against aging, and he felt worn out in a way that had nothing to do with his physical condition. Abstinence cost them. Indulgence cost them more, because when the thirst takes a brother rather than being managed by him, what follows is a loss of self. The red thirst, in its acute form, produces an overwhelming bloodlust in which a blood angel forgets his noble heritage and loses control of himself entirely, and Signus Prime is what that looks like applied to an entire legion at once. Where it came from. The origin is disputed inside the chapter, and the dispute has never been settled. Several explanations circulate among the blood angels and their successors. Some blame the process of insanguination, the ritual by which the Primarch's own blood is administered to an initiate during his making. Others point to a deep-rooted corruption in Sanguinius himself, present from the moment of his transit to Baal, in the incident that scattered the Primarchs across the galaxy. The Mechanicus has offered a third and more technical account. They have observed that blood angels possess an overactive omophagia, the implanted organ that allows an Astartes to absorb memory and knowledge by consuming flesh. Combined with the chapter's blood rituals, that overactivity may cause them to be affected by past memories far more strongly than other Marines. Hold that last explanation, because it does more work than it first appears to. An organ that pulls memory out of blood, running hot, in a chapter that drinks blood ceremonially, in a bloodline carrying the psychic imprint of its Primarch's death. Smai. The Black Rage. The second condition works as a possession by a memory rather than as a hunger. The Black Rage descends on a blood angel and replaces him. What arrives in his place is Sanguinius on the day he died. The afflicted brother believes himself to be the Primarch during the Battle of Terra, and he experiences the last hours of that battle as though they are happening now. He is reborn into a world consisting of anger, hatred, and fury, with nothing else in it, and he is stronger. Along with the memories, a brother in the Black Rage receives a portion of the Primarch's own unearthly power, which is why the Death Company can accomplish things ordinary squads cannot. The condition is irrevocable. Once it takes hold, it does not lift. There is no treatment, no remission, and no recorded case of a brother returning to himself, with two exceptions that this series will come to. The chapter has several names for it: the Fate, the Primarch's Curse, the Chaplains' Vigil, the Flaw of Sanguinius. Some records call it the First Death, but the name spoken quietly on the eve of a battle, when brothers are looking at each other and wondering, is the Black Rage. Why it exists. The mechanism is the single strangest thing in the Blood Angel story, and it was established on the day Sanguinius died. His murder was psychically violent enough to leave an imprint. Alone among all the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, the Blood Angels and their successors possess an intrinsic genetic awareness of their Primarch's final moments in the skies above Terra. The emotional echoes of that death still move through the blood of his genetic descendants 10,000 years afterward. Sit with what that means as a piece of inheritance. A man born on Baal in the 41st millennium, who has never left the Baal system, who was recruited from a tribe in a radioactive desert and made into an Astartes by procedures that have not changed in 10,000 years, carries in his blood the last minutes of a battle fought on another planet 100 centuries before he existed. Nobody taught him and nobody told him. It is in him, waiting, and if it activates, he will not experience it as a memory. He will experience it as the present moment, and he will believe he is someone else. And time has done nothing to soften it. The imprint has not weakened across 10,000 years of generations. If anything, the chapter's records suggest the opposite. How one becomes the other. The relationship between the two conditions is the practical problem the chapter manages, and the sequence is consistent enough to have become doctrine. The red thirst is present in every Blood Angel from the start. For many, it functions as a prelude. The thirst deepens, the brother's control over it degrades, and at some point the state becomes permanent and all-consuming, and what he passes into is the Black Rage, which is why the chapter watches the thirst so closely. Not because a thirsty brother is a liability in himself, but because the depth of a man's thirst is the best available predictor of when the other thing is coming for him. And the watching is systematic. On the eve of battle, the Blood Angels gather to pray and to remember Sanguinius' sacrifice, and the chaplains move among them, blessing each brother and studying him. Slurred words are marked. Disorientation is marked. Anything suggesting a man is close to the edge is noted by the overseers. Those who collapse into the chaplain's arms during the chanting are taken away. Sorl, the night before. The scene deserves describing on its own, because it happens before every major engagement the chapter fights, and because it is the most human moment in this whole account. A chamber full of warriors, on the night before a battle, performing a rite of remembrance for a man who died 10,000 years ago. Chaplains walking the rows, every brother present knowing that the rite itself is the trigger. The deeper the remembrance goes, the more likely it is that someone in the room will stop being himself. And every one of them submits to it anyway, every time, knowing his own turn is coming. If a brother is judged to be on the edge, he is withdrawn from the ranks as though he carried a contagion, and from that night his fate is sealed. There is no appeal, no second assessment, and no way back into the line. The phrase most associated with the chapter's attitude toward these men is worth paraphrasing rather than quoting. Their commanders instruct the rest to treat them with honor, on the grounds that the same fate is waiting for everyone in the room. That is the Blood Angels' entire relationship with their own inheritance, compressed into an instruction given to soldiers. Be respectful to the men who have gone, because you are them, a few years early. The ones who should not be able to. We close on the exception, because it is the loose thread that makes the whole thing unstable. The Black Rage is irrevocable. That is the doctrine, the medical assessment, and the observed reality across 10,000 years of cases. Two individuals hold it in check anyway. Chaplain Lemart carries the Black Rage and retains enough of himself to function, to speak, and to lead. Chief Librarian Mephiston went further than that, into the rage and out the other side, and came back as something the chapter has never been able to categorize. Neither case is explained. The apothecarian has studied both. No mechanism has been identified. No treatment has been derived from either man, and nothing about their experiences has been reproducible in anybody else. This series will spend a night on each of them. What matters tonight is the crack their existence puts in the doctrine. Because if the Black Rage can be held, then it amounts to a condition with an exception rather than a law of nature. And an exception implies a mechanism, and a mechanism implies that 10,000 years of Blood Angels have been sent to die in black armor for something that might, in principle, have been solved. Nobody in the chapter says this out loud. The successors inherited too. The Flaw did not stay on Baal. When the legions were broken into chapters under Guilliman's reforms, the 9th gene seed went out with its successors, and every one of them received the whole package. The flesh tearers carry it worse than the parent chapter. Their reputation across the Imperium is one of barely governed savagery. Their casualty rates against their own allies are a matter of quiet record, and their attrition has brought them close to the threshold below, which a chapter cannot rebuild itself. What the Blood Angels manage through ritual and vigilance, the flesh tearers have never managed as well. The blood drinkers, the angels sanguine, the angels in carmine, and the rest carry it in their own proportions and manage it in their own ways. And one detail from the successors makes the mechanism visible in a way nothing else does. The angels penitent used to perform the same blood rituals as the parent chapter, and gave the practice up. Since then, they have suffered the red thirst and the black rage at a much increased rate. That finding deserves a moment. A chapter stopped the rituals and got worse, which suggests the ceremonies the wider Imperium finds so disquieting are performing an actual function, and that the Blood Angels' elaborate observances around blood are load-bearing rather than decorative. What Call concluded. The most recent development in this story belongs to the Indomitus era, and to the man who built the Primaris Marines. Belisarius Call produced Primaris versions of every chapter's gene line, and when he came to the Blood Angels, he had a decision to make about the Flaw. He had the opportunity, at least in principle, to attempt its removal. He did not try. His stated reasoning is among the more unsettling pieces of lore attached to this chapter. Call assumed that the Emperor had given the Blood Angels the red thirst deliberately, for reasons of his own, and on that basis declined to interfere with it. Consider the implication if he was right. The Flaw would then be a feature rather than a defect, something built into the 9th Legion on purpose, by the being who designed all 20 of them, for a purpose never explained to Sanguinius, who spent his life believing it was his own fault and searching in secret for a cure. Nothing confirms Call's assumption. He is a man who has been wrong before and who reasons from premises nobody else can inspect. but the decision stands regardless of the reasoning behind it, and its consequence is that the Primaris blood angels carry the inheritance too. They carry it in a reduced form. Primaris blood angels show more resistance to both the red thirst and the black rage than their older brothers, and the difference is real. It is also incomplete. They are not immune, cases still occur, and the chapter still requires a death company. 10,000 years, and the most gifted technologist in the Imperium looked at the problem and decided to leave it where it was. What nobody has solved. We close on the accounting, because the shape of it explains the whole chapter. Sanguinius searched for a cure privately for a century, and found nothing, and executed his own sons in the meantime. The chapter's apothecarian has studied the Flaw for 100 centuries, and produced management rather than treatment. 2 brothers hold the black rage in check, and neither case has yielded anything reproducible. A successor chapter abandoned the rituals and got worse rather than better. And the Imperium's foremost janitor examined the whole problem in the 42nd millennium and concluded it should be left alone. Every avenue has been tried. What the Blood Angels have to show for all of it is a set of procedures for identifying the afflicted, a colour of paint, and a tower. Sleep well. Tomorrow we go to the Black Armour, and to the tower where the ones who cannot fight are kept. A Blood Angel collapses during the rite. The chanting is still going on around him. The Chaplains are moving down the rows, and one of them reaches him before he hits the floor. And that is the moment his life as himself ends. He will not be spoken to again as the man he was. He will not return to his squad, will not resume his duties, and will not be assessed a second time. From that night, everything about him is administered, rather than decided. Tonight we look at what the chapter does with him, and at the 2 places he can be sent. The repainting. The first thing that happens is cosmetic, and it is the most significant ritual in the entire chapter. His armour is taken and repainted black. Over the black goes a red saltire, a diagonal cross across the chest, and the meaning of that marking is specific. It represents the wounds Sanguinius took in the Golden Hall above Terra. The plate is then hung with devotional scrolls, and with the records of every honour the brother earned before the madness took him. His campaigns, his citations, whatever he achieved across however many decades of service, written out and attached to the armour of a man who can no longer read them, sit with the care in that procedure. Nothing about it is required. A chapter that regarded the afflicted as a resource to be expended would not spend an artificer's time transcribing the service record of a warrior who has stopped being able to understand what a service record is. The Blood Angels do it every time. Why black? The colour is worth its own moment, because it inverts everything the chapter is known for. Blood Angels wear red. Their armour, their heraldry, their whole visual identity across 10,000 years is the deep crimson that gave them their name, and the chapter maintains it to a standard that borders on the obsessive. The Blood Angels will go to considerable lengths to obtain the materials for their art and their equipment, and have fought wars to secure them. The Death Company wears the opposite. Black is the colour of loss and of sorrow in the chapter's vocabulary, and a brother clad in it has been visually removed from the chapter he served while remaining physically among them. He walks into the same battle as his brothers, in the same formation, under the same banners, and he is the only one on the field wearing the colour that means he is already gone. The company itself. The Death Company is unique to the Blood Angels and their successors, and no equivalent exists anywhere else in the Adeptus Astartes. It has no fixed strength, no permanent membership, and no roster maintained in advance. It exists in the shape the chapter's current affliction gives it. However many brothers succumbed before this campaign is however large the death company is for this campaign. They are unleashed rather than deployed. A vanguard of lost souls fighting with the strength and endurance of the damned, sent where the fighting is worst, aimed at the objectives that would cost an ordinary formation the most, and the intent behind that deployment is stated openly in the chapter's own doctrine, which is what separates the death company from a penal unit. They are sent to the most dangerous assaults in the hope of a quick and honourable death in battle. That is the purpose. A brother in the Black Rage is going to die insane regardless, in a tower, over an unknown span of time, having forgotten who he is. What the chapter offers instead is the chance to die at speed, in armour, facing an enemy, in the only way an Astartes recognizes as clean. Who leads them, commanding men who believe they are somebody else, in a battle they think is happening 10,000 years ago, is not a normal officer's problem. The death company is led by chaplains and by a small number of other officers with the particular gift required, because those are the only people to whom the afflicted will respond at all. A chaplain in the Blood Angels serves as spiritual leader, ritual authority, and interpreter for men who have lost the ability to receive an ordinary order. How that works is worth stating with precision. A brother in the Black Rage believes he is Sanguinius above Terra. He responds to the language of that moment, to the imagery of it, and to the authority of a figure who fits inside the scene he is living in. A chaplain who understands this can direct him. Nobody else can, which produces one of the quietest horrors in this chapter's practice. The chaplains lead the death company by speaking into the delusion rather than against it, positioning themselves inside a dying Primarch's last hour and issuing instructions from there. And no Blood Angels commander treats these brothers carelessly. The chapter's own writing on the subject is emphatic, and the reason given has nothing to do with sentimentality. The officers issuing those orders expect to be in the black armour themselves before their careers are over. Lemart. One chaplain deserves his own section here, because his position is the strangest job in the Imperium. Lemart carries the Black Rage. He succumbed like anyone else, and he should by every rule of the condition have been lost in it permanently. He was not. Lemart holds it in check, retains enough of himself to speak and to command, and has been doing so for a long time. And what the chapter did with that discovery is put him in charge of the death company. Consider what his working life consists of. He goes into battle at the head of a formation of men experiencing the exact condition he is himself experiencing, using his own partial lucidity to direct them, in a state that could take him whole at any moment. Between engagements, he is kept in stasis. The chapter does not leave him walking around, because the rage in him is held rather than cured, and the containment is not guaranteed to last. He is brought out when the death company is needed and put back when it is over. A man kept frozen between battles because he is too valuable to lose and too dangerous to leave running. That is the Blood Angels' solution to their most useful officer. The Tower of the Lost. In peacetime, there is no death company, because in peacetime, there is nowhere to send them. What the chapter has instead is a structure inside the fortress monastery on Baal called the Tower of the Lost. Brothers who succumb between campaigns are imprisoned there, not held, not treated, not rehabilitated. Imprisoned, under the permanent watch of chaplain guardians until the change finishes with them and they pass into full insanity, and then until they die. The accounts describe them crying out their torment under that eternal watch, and the phrasing is worth sitting with. These are not men raging in silence. The tower is loud, and it has been loud for 10,000 years, and the chaplains who keep the watch there hear it continuously. There is a version of this chapter's story in which the death company is the tragedy. It is not. The death company is the mercy. The tower is what happens to a brother who breaks at the wrong point in the campaign calendar, and the difference between the two fates is nothing but timing. What the tower contains. The arithmetic of the place across the chapter's history is worth working out. The Blood Angels have been losing brothers to the Black Rage continuously since the heresy. Some go into black armour and die within days. The rest go into the tower. 10,000 years of accumulation in a structure that has never been emptied, on a world with nowhere else to put them. And every one of those men, at the moment he was taken, was living through the same hour. The Tower of the Lost is full of blood angels who all believe they are the same person, all fighting the same battle, all at the same point in it. The chapter's apothecarian has studied them. The chapter's librarius has examined them. Nothing has come of either. What the tower has produced across 100 centuries is a body of observation and no treatment whatsoever. Why they keep doing it. We close with the question that sits under this entire practice, and the answer is the chapter's whole character. Nothing obliges the Blood Angels to maintain the Death Company. The Imperium would raise no objection to a chapter that quietly executed its afflicted, and several chapters in the Imperium's history have done far worse on far thinner grounds. The flesh-tearers, carrying the same inheritance, manage it with far less ceremony. The Blood Angels repaint the armour. They transcribe the honours. They send chaplains into the delusion to give these men something to follow. They keep the tower staffed with guardians who listen to the crying out and do not look away. And they treat the whole apparatus as an obligation rather than a burden. The reason is the instruction their own commanders give about it, paraphrased earlier in this series. Honour them, because their fate will be yours. Every officer in that chapter, from the newest sergeant to the chapter master himself, is looking at the black armour and seeing his own future. Rather than a unit the Blood Angels maintain for other people, it is the destination, and the men running it know that, and the care they take is care taken in advance for themselves. Astorath. One officer exists whose function the chapter has never found a comfortable way to describe, and his title says most of it. Astorath the Grim, High Chaplain of the Blood Angels, is called the Redeemer of the Lost. He travels between the Blood Angels and every one of their successor chapters across the galaxy, and he goes where the Flaw has taken hold, and what he does when he arrives is the reason the successors both need him and dread the sight of him. Astorath identifies brothers lost to the Black Rage, and he grants them the Emperor's peace. That is the euphemism. What it describes is execution. A high chaplain travelling from chapter to chapter with an executioner's axe, finding men who have gone past the point where black armour would help them, and ending them personally. Note who does this job. Not an apothecary, not a disciplinary officer, not an inquisitorial appointment imposed from outside. A chaplain, the same office that leads the death company, that reads brothers on the eve of battle, that keeps the watch on the tower. The Blood Angels put the killing of their own afflicted inside their spiritual arm, rather than their disciplinary one. and the man who performs it is treated as a figure of mercy rather than of punishment. Astorath has an additional and stranger duty. Wherever he goes, he assesses. A successor chapter with a rising incidence of the Flaw draws his attention, and his judgments have consequences for how those chapters are permitted to operate. He is functionally the Imperium's monitoring system for a genetic condition, staffed by one man who kills the worst cases himself. He has been doing it for a very long time, and the accounts describe him as grim in a manner that has nothing to do with his title. The sanguinary priests. Alongside the chaplains stands the other half of the apparatus, and their role explains why the Blood Angels' rituals look the way they do to outsiders. Sanguinary priests combine two functions that other chapters keep separate. They are apothecaries, responsible for the medical care of their brothers and for the recovery of gene seed from the dead, and they are priests, responsible for the blood rites at the center of the chapter's religious life. The two roles are the same role here because in this chapter, the blood is both the medical problem and the sacred object. Each sanguinary priest carries a chalice containing blood traced back, by the chapter's own account, to Sanguinius himself. That blood is administered to initiates during their making, in the process called insanguination, and it is one of the candidate explanations for the Flaw that the chapter has never ruled out. The circularity of that deserves a moment. The rite that may be causing the condition is administered by the men responsible for treating it, using a substance the chapter venerates, in a ceremony nobody is willing to abandon because the one successor chapter that abandoned its rituals got worse. The Sanguinor and the question nobody answers. Something else walks onto Blood Angels' battlefields, and the chapter has never explained it. The Sanguinor appears at moments of extremity, a winged figure in golden armor, silent, arriving where the chapter's position is worst, fighting with a skill that exceeds anything a mortal Astartes displays, and departing afterward without speaking to anyone. Nobody knows what it is. The theories inside the chapter run from a manifestation of Sanguinius' spirit to a blood angel elevated by some process nobody has documented, to something the Emperor arranged, to something that is not on the chapter's side at all and has its own reasons for the assistance it provides. What is recorded is the correlation. The Sanguinor tends to appear where the death company is committed and where the Flaw is at its most active, and the chapter's own librarius has noticed the pattern without being able to interpret it. A chapter defined by an inheritance it cannot explain is periodically assisted by a figure it cannot identify at the exact moments when that inheritance is worst. The Blood Angels take the help. They have never worked out what they are taking it from. The cost of the whole arrangement. Before we close, an accounting of what this system cost the chapter in the plainest terms available. Every brother lost to the Black Rage is a warrior with decades or centuries of experience removed from the order of battle. A chapter is 1,000 Marines. The Blood Angels lose a proportion of theirs to the Flaw continuously, in addition to combat losses, and the losses fall disproportionately on veterans, because the longer a brother serves, the closer he comes to his own turn. The chapter has to over-recruit to stay at strength, which means drawing more heavily on Baal's tribes than a comparable chapter would. It has to maintain the tower, staffed permanently, forever. It has to keep chaplains trained in a specialism no other chapter requires. It has to build every battle plan around a formation whose size cannot be predicted before the rite the night before. And it has to do all of this while conducting the ordinary business of a chapter in the 41st millennium. Crusades, defense, obligations to the wider Imperium, and the maintenance of a homeworld in a system that has never recovered from an atomic war. The Blood Angels manage it. That is the part worth registering. 10,000 years of a genetic condition that removes their best warriors on an unpredictable schedule, and they remain one of the Imperium's foremost chapters, with a reputation the equal of any first founding line. Sleep well. Tomorrow, we go to the man who has held the chapter together for 1100 years and has not been allowed to stop. There is a man on Baal who has been the chapter master of the Blood Angels for over 1100 years. Not 1100 years of service, 1100 years in the office. He took command before most of the Imperium's current institutions had reached their present shape, has held it without interruption since, and is by a wide margin the oldest living loyalist space marine in the galaxy. He wears a golden death mask made in the likeness of Sanguinius. Underneath it is the face of an old man, which is not something an Astartes body is supposed to be capable of producing. Tonight we look at Commander Dante, and at the particular cost of being the one who holds. How he got there. He came from Baal Secundus, from the tribes, the same source the chapter has drawn on since the Legion took the world. His rise through the chapter was rapid, and it was earned in the ordinary way. Capability, repeatedly demonstrated, across a career that had already been long by any normal standard before he took command. By the time the mastership fell to him, he was an experienced officer with a substantial record behind him. Then he kept the post for 11 centuries, and the record stopped being ordinary. What Dante has presided over in that time includes some of the worst crises the Imperium has faced. He has fought orc wars, tyrannid hive fleets, chaos incursions, and the collapse of the Imperium's central communications after the Great Rift opened. He has commanded coalitions drawn from many chapters as well as his own, and the Imperium has turned to him for that role repeatedly, because there is nobody else alive with his span of experience. And the whole time, he has been carrying the same thing every other Blood Angel carries. Chati, the abstinence. The detail that defines him is a discipline nobody required of him, and it is the reason he looks the way he does. Dante abstained from drinking blood for centuries. Every Blood Angel carries the red thirst. The chapter manages it partly through ritual consumption, and a brother who takes part in those rites remains at his physical peak in the way an Astartes is engineered to. A brother who abstains grows weaker and ages. Dante abstained anyway, for a very long time, and the results are visible on him. His skin wrinkled, his hair went white. He acquired the appearance of an elderly man inside a body designed to resist that very outcome. And alongside the physical decline, he felt psychologically worn out in a way that had nothing to do with any wound. Consider what that discipline consists of in practice. Every day, for centuries, a man with an appetite bred into his blood declined to satisfy it, knowing that the abstinence was costing him strength he would need, and knowing that the cost was cumulative and would not reverse. The mask he wears in battle is a likeness of Sanguinius in gold. Underneath it, a face that has aged past what his physiology permits, on a man who chose the aging. Maguise, what he has been waiting for. Here is the part of Dante's story that the Imperium's official accounts leave out, and that his own chapter knows. He wants to die, not out of despair, and not as a failure of duty. Dante has wanted an honorable death in battle for a long time, in the way an Astartes of his age and background understands such things, and he has been denied it repeatedly by the simple fact that the chapter and the Imperium keep needing him alive. Every crisis produces the same outcome. Dante commits himself to the worst position available and survives it, and the survival obliges him to continue. There is nobody to hand the chapter to who could carry what he carries. So he continues. 1100 years of that. A man who has been ready to stop for centuries, kept in post by the absence of an alternative, presiding over a chapter whose own doctrine promises every one of its officers an honourable death, and has declined to give him one. The weight of the vigil. One specific thing makes his position heavier than an equivalent post in any other chapter. The Blood Angel's chapter. Master carries duties well past command. He is the keeper of the vigil over the golden sarcophagus, the figure who conducts the chapter's most solemn rites in the presence of the Primarch's body, and the man responsible for the Tower of the Lost, the Death Company, and the whole apparatus this series described last night. Which means Dante has spent 1100 years watching brothers succumb, not reading reports about it, attending the rites, standing among the chaplains, seeing the collapses, and authorizing what happens afterward. He has sent men he trained into black armor. He has committed the Death Company to assaults he knew would not return. He has stood in the chamber with his Primarch's body and conducted ceremonies for warriors whose service he personally remembers. And he has done it while carrying the certain knowledge that the same condition is inside him, that his own age makes it more likely rather than less, and that the men whose fate he administers are a preview of his own. Baal under the rift. The crisis that defines his late career came when the Great Rift opened and cut the galaxy in half. The Baal system found itself in the path of High Fleet Leviathan, a tyrannid force of a scale that had consumed whole sectors elsewhere, and Dante did the arithmetic. His own chapter could not hold it. Baal would fall, the Primarch's body would be lost, and the gene line would end. So he sent out a call. Astropathic messages went to every successor chapter of the Blood Angels across the galaxy, requesting that they make for their Primarch's world of origin. And they came. A force of 20,000 Space Marines gathered in defense of the Baal sector, drawn from chapters that had not stood together in living memory. No two answered. The call went to everyone descended from Sanguinius, and that included brotherhoods that had been shunned across the Imperium for indulging the red thirst too openly. Chapters other Astartes would not fight alongside. Dante called them anyway, and they came anyway, and they stood on the same wall as the parent chapter. Whatever else the Flaw has cost this bloodline, it produced a loyalty across 10,000 years of separation that almost no other gene line could have summoned. Bands. What it cost to hold Baal. The devastation of Baal is among the worst things that happened to any chapter in the Imperium's recent history, and it is worth being plain about the outcome. The defense held in the sense that Baal was not consumed. The cost was catastrophic. The Blood Angels and their successors were reduced to a fraction of the force that had gathered. The world itself was ruined further than an already ruined system could easily absorb. And chapters that had answered Dante's call left a substantial proportion of their strength on that planet. The Baal sector survived. What survived was not what had arrived, and Dante survived it too, which by that stage in his story reads less like fortune than like a sentence. He committed himself where the fighting was worst, as he always does, and the fighting took nearly everyone around him and left him standing. 1. Regent of the Imperium, Nihilus. The consequence of Baal was the last thing Dante needed, which is why he received it. With the great rift dividing the Imperium and the darkened half cut off from Terra's light and authority, Somebody had to hold the Imperium Nihilus together. The appointment went to Dante, regent of the Imperium Nihilus, responsible for the coordination of an entire half of a galaxy-spanning state, under conditions where communication with the center is unreliable at best. A man who has wanted to lay down his duties for centuries received, in his 11th century of command, the largest set of duties the Imperium had left to give. He took it. Of course he took it. That is the entire pattern of his life. And the Imperium has learned that it can keep loading Dante because Dante will keep accepting. The reason he matters. We close on why this figure belongs at the center of a series about a genetic flaw. Everything else in this account has been about a chapter that cannot escape what is in its blood. Sanguinius searched and failed. The apothecarian has studied for 100 centuries and produced management rather than cure. The tower fills. The black armor goes out. Dante is the counter-argument, and he is a partial one. He has held the Red Thirst at arm's length for centuries by an act of will that cost him his body's youth and gave him nothing back. He has kept himself intact across a span in which every actuarial expectation says he should have gone under. He has run the chapter, the vigil, the tower, and half an Imperium at once, while carrying the same inheritance that has taken thousands of his brothers. He has not beaten it. Nothing in his story suggests he has. What he has done is refuse it daily for 1100 years at a cost he pays continuously and visibly in a face that ages under a golden mask. That is the only kind of victory this chapter has ever been offered, and Dante is the man who has held it longest. The mask. The death mask of Sanguinius deserves its own account, because Dante's relationship with it explains a great deal about how this chapter treats its own history. The mask is a golden likeness of the Primarch's face, and it is worn by the chapter master in battle. Dante has worn it for 1100 years, which means that for over a millennium, the men of the Blood Angels have gone into battle following a figure wearing their father's face. Weigh the effect of that on the chapter's psychology and on the enemies who face it. A Blood Angel in the Black Rage believes he is Sanguinius at the Siege of Terra, and his commanding officer on the same field is wearing Sanguinius's face in gold. The chapter has never treated this as a problem. It is treated as continuity. The chapter master carries the Primarch's likeness because the office exists to carry his authority, and the men following the mask are following what the mask represents rather than the man behind it. What that arrangement cost the man behind it is not discussed. Dante has spent 11 centuries being the visible stand-in for a figure who died 10,000 years ago, in front of warriors whose own affliction makes them liable to confuse the two, and there is no record of him ever complaining about the arrangement. What happened to the ones before him? A detail worth adding for context. 1100 years is not the normal tenure for this office. The Blood Angels have had many chapter masters across their history, and the great majority of them served terms measured in decades or a century or two before falling in battle or succumbing to the flaw. That is the expected pattern for a chapter with this inheritance. The office turns over. Dante broke the pattern and has kept breaking it, and the chapter has organized itself around his continuity in ways that would be difficult to unwind, which produces a succession problem that his own officers understand and rarely discuss. A chapter that has had one commander for 11 centuries has an entire officer corps that has never known another. The captains beneath him are experienced, capable, and untested in the specific matter of holding the thing Dante holds, and every year he continues, is another year that question stays unanswered. This is a real cost, and it sits on the other side of the ledger from everything his longevity has provided. The Imperium's most experienced commander is also a single point of failure that a chapter has been building around for over 1,000 years. Why the Imperium keeps calling. One more angle on Dante's position, and it concerns his standing outside his own chapter. The Imperium of the 41st millennium is not short of Space Marine chapter masters. What it is short of is continuity. Institutional memory in the Imperium is fragmentary, records are contradictory, and most commanders serve for a period brief enough that their personal experience covers a narrow slice of history. Dante's covers 11 centuries. He has personally fought campaigns that most of the Imperium's current commanders know only as archive entries. When a crisis resembles something that happened 400 years ago, Dante was there. That makes him useful in a way the Imperium cannot replace, and the Imperium has used him accordingly. Coalition commands, joint operations, appointments that no chapter master would ordinarily receive, and at the last, the regency of half a galaxy. And every one of those appointments has extended his service by years or decades, which means the Imperium's need for his experience is the mechanism keeping him from the ending he wants. The more he does, the more he is asked to do. There is no version of this in which he is released, because his release would cost the Imperium the one thing it cannot manufacture: the shape of his whole life. Before we close, it is worth laying the pattern out in one place, because the individual elements are easier to absorb than the whole. He was born on a poisoned moon into a tribe scratching a living out of a radioactive desert. He was made into an Astartes by procedures that included the administration of his Primarch's blood, which is one of the candidate causes of the condition he has spent his life resisting. He rose through the chapter on merit and took the mastership at a point when the office turned over every century or so. Then he did not stop, not for 1100 years. He denied himself the one thing his blood asks for and paid for that denial in visible aging. He has watched thousands of brothers go into black armor and the tower, has authorized every stage of the apparatus that handles them, and has conducted the rites over their remains. He has wanted to lay it down for centuries and has been given more instead, each time, without exception. He called every chapter of his bloodline to Baal and watched most of them die there. He was made regent of half the Imperium afterward, and he is still standing, still wearing his father's face in gold, still refusing an appetite that has never stopped asking. Sleep well. Tomorrow we go to the one who went into the Black Rage and came back out of it. Everything this series has established says tonight's story should not exist. The Black Rage is irrevocable. That is the chapter's doctrine, the apothecarian's assessment, and the observed reality across 10,000 years of cases. A brother who succumbs goes into black armor and dies, or goes into the tower and dies there. Nobody comes back. One man did. He was buried under a collapsed building on a world called Armageddon for 7 days, in the black armor, with his father's death running through him. And on the 7th night, something got out of the rubble. It was not the man who went in. Brother Calistarius. Before any of it, he was ordinary. That is the detail worth holding through everything that follows. Calistarius was a librarian of the Blood Angels, a psyker of the chapter's librarius, described in the records as possessing exceptional strength of character and useful ability. He held the rank of Lexicanium, which is junior. He had a service record with real achievements in it, including a boarding action against a space hulk as an honorary member of the First Company, promising, capable, nothing that marked him out as a candidate for anything unprecedented. The Black Rage does not select for merit. The chapter's own writing on the subject is explicit that the curse cares nothing for nobility of soul, or for what a brother has achieved in the flesh, and Calistarius is the proof of it. He was a good officer, and then he was in the Death Company, and the transition took no account of anything he had ever done. Hades' Hive. It happened during the Second War for Armageddon, in the fighting before the walls of Hades' Hive, with the Blood Angels committed as a relief force against an Orc invasion of a scale the Imperium had few precedents for. Calistarius went under in the middle of it, and here a detail from his case deserves flagging, because it is unusual and nobody has explained it. A psyker who succumbs to the Black Rage is usually executed rather than inducted into the Death Company, on the reasoning that an afflicted librarian with the rage in him and psychic power at his disposal is a danger nobody can afford. Calistarius was spared that. No account establishes who made the decision or why. He was given the black armor instead and sent forward with the rest. The Death Company's assignment at Hades was the assault on an ecclesiarchy building. During the fighting, the structure came down, and Calistarius was among the many buried when it collapsed, and the chapter recorded him as lost with the others. 7 days. What happened under the rubble is the strangest thing in the Blood Angels' entire history, and the accounts of it are consistent in outline and vague in mechanism, which is appropriate for something nobody witnessed. He was trapped, physically pinned, in wrecked armor, unable to move, with no prospect of rescue because everyone above ground believed him dead. And he was in the Black Rage, which means he was not experiencing a collapsed building on Armageddon. He was experiencing his Primarch's last hour. The duel, the sacrifice, the fury that comes with the racial memory, running through him without pause and without any of the relief that battle normally provides to a Death Company brother. For 7 days, alone in the dark, under stone, reliving a death that was not his own, with no enemy to kill and no way to burn any of it off. Every mechanism the chapter has for managing this condition was unavailable to him. No chaplain to speak into the delusion, no assault to expend himself in, no Astorath arriving with the Emperor's peace. Nothing but the man, the memory, and the rubble. By the 7th day, he was on the edge of death as well as madness. What he did. The accounts converge on the same substance and split on the details, and both versions are worth having. The chapter's plainer telling is that he did it by will. Trapped and dying, Calistarius suppressed the rage and the desire for blood by sheer strength of will, held them in check hour after hour, and in doing so became something more than he had been. The other telling includes a vision. In it, Sanguinius himself appeared to Calistarius in the rubble and told him to take heart, to overcome the madness that had hold of his soul, and to become an example to his brothers by demonstrating that the rage could be conquered. Neither version can be verified. Calistarius was the only person present, and the person who came out of the rubble is careful about what he says. What is agreed is the outcome. On the 7th night, the thing under the building started moving stone and got out. What came out? His gene seed had woken up. Whatever had been dormant in him activated during those 7 days and wrought further changes, and what emerged from the crater possessed strength and vigor beyond what he had before, along with psychic power that would shortly make him one of the mightiest psychers in the Imperium. A band of orcs was picking through the ruins nearby, and the noise of shifting stone drew them. What they found was a space marine in shredded black armor with no weapon, alone, apparently helpless. He killed them with his hands. The accounts describe him moving at a speed the orcs could not follow, and describe him punching through their leader's chest and crushing the heart, and describe the survivors running. That is the first recorded act of Mephiston, Lord of Death. The name. The renaming is where this story stops being a survival account and becomes something harder. Calistarius did not resume his old name, his old rank, or his old life. He took a new name, and the chapter accepted it, and the man who had gone into the rubble was recorded as having died there. And Mephiston's own position on the matter is more literal than a change of title. He has said, when pressed on it, that he is not Calistarius, that Calistarius is dead, that he has Calistarius's memories and Calistarius's body, and that this does not make him the same person. Sit with the coldness of that formulation. A man walks out of a collapsed building and tells his chapter that the brother they knew died under the rubble, that what came out is a different entity wearing his flesh, and that the memories inside it belong to somebody who no longer exists. The chapter promoted him. He rose to Chief Librarian of the Blood Angels, Master of the Librarius, and has held the office since. What his brothers think. The chapter's reaction to Mephiston is the most honest thing about this whole story, because gratitude has very little to do with it. They are uneasy around him, all of them, by his own account, with the single exception of Dante. A chapter that has spent 10,000 years losing brothers to a curse acquired one man who beat it, and the result is that his own brothers keep their distance. The reasoning is not hard to reconstruct. Something is different about him in a way that reads on contact, rather than in a report. The eyes, the presence, the manner. Veteran Astartes, who have faced demons, find themselves uncomfortable in a room with their own chief librarian. And there is an objection with real content behind it, voiced by a reclusiarch who had known Calistarius before Armageddon, and who met Mephiston long afterward. He called him a revenant and an abomination, and said he was not a true blood angel, and his argument was this: the flaw is part of what makes them what they are. That is worth taking seriously rather than dismissing as superstition. A chapter defined for 10,000 years by an inheritance it cannot escape has a member who escaped it. Either the escape is a triumph, or the man who escaped has stopped being a blood angel in the way the rest of them understand the term, and the chapter has never resolved which. The price. The rumours are recorded in the chapter's own materials rather than in gossip, and they are the reason nobody has tried to replicate what he did. The whispers hold that Mephiston paid a dreadful price for his resurrection, that when he mastered the Black Rage, something else took its place. Nothing confirms this. The chapter's official position is that such rumours are probably baseless, the kind of thing that attaches itself to any greatness, and that they should be disregarded. But Mephiston keeps his secrets close, and the chapter's own writing acknowledges that only time will show what he is. Consider the structure of that situation. The Blood Angels have one man who solved their central problem. He will not explain how. What is inside him now cannot be examined, has not been reproduced, and may be worse than the thing it displaced. And he holds one of the two most senior officers in the chapter. Dante trusts him. That is stated. Whether Dante has grounds for the trust, or has decided that the alternative is unmanageable, is a distinction the records do not draw. Twice. one further detail, and it deepens rather than resolves everything above. He has done it more than once. Mephiston is recorded as having defeated the pull of the Black Rage twice in his life, regaining his sanity both times, and no other blood angel or successor has managed it even once, which means the condition came back for him. Whatever he did in the rubble on Armageddon did not make him immune, and at some later point the rage took him again, and he fought it off again. That is the part of his story that undercuts the hopeful reading. Mephiston is not cured. He is a man who has twice been pulled under and twice climbed back out, holding an office of enormous responsibility in a chapter that has no idea what he will be if it happens a third time. The other one. Mephiston is not alone in the exception, and the second case is worth setting beside him because the two of them failed and succeeded in different directions. Lamart, described earlier in this series, also carries the Black Rage and also holds it in check. But the two conditions are nothing alike in practice. Lamart's holds his. It is present, active and pressing on him continuously, and what he has is the capacity to keep functioning inside it, rather than any escape from it. That is why the chapter keeps him in stasis between engagements. The containment is ongoing work, and leaving him running risks losing the containment. Mephiston passed through his and came out somewhere else. The result was a transformation rather than a suppression, which is why he holds high office, walks freely, and is never described as being managed by anyone. Two exceptions, two entirely different relationships with the same condition, and no mechanism connecting them. The chapter has studied both. Neither has produced a treatment for anyone else, and there is a bleak observation available in the comparison. Lamart, who holds the rage rather than escaping it, is still recognizably the man he was. Mephiston, who escaped it, says he is not. Where he stands now. Mephiston's role in the chapter of the 41st millennium is worth setting out, because it has grown into something no chief librarian's post normally becomes. He commands the librarius, which is the ordinary duty of his office. Beyond that, he functions as the chapter's investigator into matters nobody else can approach. Warp phenomena, demonic incursions, and problems whose nature the chapter cannot categorize. Where something requires a blood angel who can walk into conditions that would destroy an ordinary brother, Mephiston is sent. That deployment pattern has taken him well beyond the chapter's own campaigns. He has operated alongside the Inquisition, in places and against enemies the chapter's official records treat with deliberate vagueness, and he has come back from all of it. Note the convenience of the arrangement for everybody involved. The chapter has a member whose presence makes his brothers uneasy, and a category of problem that requires his particular capabilities, and the solution to both is that Mephiston is usually elsewhere. Whether that is deliberate on anyone's part is not recorded. What is recorded is the pattern. The question underneath. Before we close, the interpretive problem that this figure creates for his chapter deserves stating in full, because it runs deeper than uneasiness. Everything the blood angels do about the Flaw assumes it cannot be beaten. The black armor, the tower, the chaplains reading brothers on the eve of battle, Astaroth traveling the galaxy with an axe, the whole apparatus this series has described, all of it is built on management rather than cure. Mephiston is a standing refutation of the premise the apparatus rests on, and the chapter has responded by treating him as a singular event rather than as evidence. He is celebrated, promoted, deployed, and quietly excluded from the reasoning about what happens to everyone else. No procedure has changed because of him. No brother in black armor has been offered anything different since Armageddon. there is a defensible reason for that. Nothing about his case is reproducible, and building doctrine on an unrepeatable event would be irresponsible. There is also a less comfortable reason, and it is the one the Reclusiarch's accusation points at. If the flaw is what makes them what they are, then a cure would end the Blood Angels as surely as the curse does, and the chapter's investment in managing the condition, rather than defeating it, may not be entirely about feasibility. Nobody in the chapter says this out loud either. What he proves. We close on the question this series has been circling since part 4. If one man beat the Black Rage, then the Black Rage is beatable. That inference is straightforward, and its consequences are enormous, and the chapter has spent a long time not drawing them, because nothing about Mephiston is reproducible. The 7 days cannot be arranged. The vision, if it happened, cannot be summoned. The gene seed awakening cannot be induced, and the price, whatever it was, cannot be assessed in advance by anyone considering paying it. So the Blood Angels have proof that their curse can be defeated, and no path to defeating it. Every brother who goes into black armor after Armageddon does so, knowing that a man in the same armor walked out of the same condition, and that nobody knows how, and that the way he came out troubles the men who knew him before. 10,000 years of the flaw produced a single exception, and the exception says he is a different person now. Sleep well. Tomorrow, the last night, and the question of what all of it was for. 7 nights ago, this series began on a poison moon, with a tribe that had every reason to kill a winged child and decided to raise him instead. Tonight we finish with what he left behind, and with the question that has been waiting under all of it, whether an inheritance like this one is a wound or a design. The devastation of Baal. The chapter's most recent catastrophe belongs here rather than in Dante's part, because what it revealed was about the bloodline rather than about its commander. High Fleet Leviathan came for the Baal system. Dante calculated that his own chapter could not hold it, and sent astropathic messages to every successor chapter descended from Sanguinius, asking them to come to their Primarch's world of origin. 20,000 Space Marines gathered in the defense of the Baal sector. Consider what that number represents. 20 chapters worth of strength, drawn from across a galaxy, assembled on one world by nothing, except a shared ancestor and a request. No imperial authority compelled it. No strategic doctrine required it. Chapters that had operated separately for 10,000 years, that had developed their own customs and their own grievances, arrived because Baal asked, and Dante's call went to everyone, including the brotherhoods the wider Imperium had spurned for indulging the red thirst too openly. Chapters other Astartes would not fight beside came, and were placed on the wall, and held it alongside the rest. The defense succeeded in the sense that Baal was not consumed. The cost was catastrophic. The gathered force was reduced to a fraction of itself. The system was ruined beyond what an already ruined system could easily absorb, and chapters that had answered the call left most of their strength on that planet. The bloodline survived. What survived was smaller in every direction. What the gathering proved, the attendance at Baal is more interesting than the battle. 10,000 years of separation, and one call brought them. That is not a normal property of Space Marine chapters, most of which regard their independence as close to sacred, and their relationships with cousins as a matter of protocol rather than kinship. The Sons of Sanguinius have something else, and this series has been describing its mechanism for 8 nights. They share an affliction that no other chapter can understand, an inheritance that arrives in their blood without being taught, and a memory of the same hour above Terra that every one of them carries whether or not it has activated. The Flaw divided them from the rest of the Imperium. It also bound them to each other, permanently and involuntarily, in a way that outlasted 100 centuries of independent history. That is the first answer this series can offer to the question of whether the inheritance is a wound. Whatever else it did, it produced a gene line that will cross a galaxy for each other on request. The blood that will not let go. Set the whole mechanism out one more time, because the shape of it is the point. Sanguinius died in a golden hall, refusing an offer, in a manner he had foreseen for decades. The death was psychically violent enough to write itself into the gene seed of everyone descended from him. His sons did not learn about it. They received it, and they are still receiving it. A blood angel born in the 41st millennium on a radioactive moon, who has never seen Terra, carries the last hour of that battle in his blood, and if it activates, he will not experience it as history. He will experience it as now, and he will believe he is his father, and he will fight the same fight. Every ritual, every institution, every office and procedure this series has described exists to manage that one fact: the black armor, the red psalter, the tower, the chaplains reading brothers on the eve of battle, Astorath with his axe, the sanguinary priests and their chalices, the stasis pod that holds Lamats between engagements, a chapter of the Adeptus. Astartes has organized its entire existence around a memory that will not stop arriving. Wound or design? Now the question this series has been building toward, and there are two serious answers. The first is that it is damage. Something went wrong. In the gene seed, in the insanguination rite, in whatever touched Sanguinius during his transit to Baal, or in the psychic violence of his death. Under this reading, the Flaw is a defect. Sanguinius was right to blame himself and right to search for a cure, and 10,000 years of blood angels have been paying for an accident. The second answer comes from Belisarius Call, and it is worse. When Call built the Primaris blood angels, he had the opportunity to attempt the removal of the red thirst, and he declined. His reasoning was that the Emperor had given the blood angels the thirst deliberately, for purposes of his own, and that interfering would be presumptuous. If Call is right, the accounting changes entire. The Flaw would be a feature installed on purpose by the being who designed all 20 legions, for a reason never explained to anyone. Sanguinius would have spent a century hiding a defect that was not a defect, blaming himself for something that was done to him, and executing his own sons over a condition his father built into them on purpose. Nothing confirms Carl's assumption. He reasons from premises nobody else can inspect, and he has been wrong before. But his decision stands regardless of whether his reasoning was sound, and the consequence is that Primaris blood angels carry the inheritance too in reduced form, with the death company still required. Why? What the chapter does with it. Between those two readings sits the thing the blood angels themselves have done, and it is neither acceptance nor resistance. They manage it, and they manage it with a degree of care that no external requirement can explain. The Imperium would not object to a chapter that quietly killed its afflicted. Several chapters in the Imperium's history have done far worse on far thinner grounds. The flesh-tearers, carrying the identical inheritance, manage it with a fraction of the ceremony and far heavier attrition. The blood angels repaint the armor black and mark it with their father's wounds. They transcribe every honor a lost brother earned onto plate he can no longer read. They send chaplains into the delusion to give these men a voice they can follow. They keep guardians on a tower that has been loud for 10,000 years. And their commanders instruct the rest of the chapter to treat the afflicted with honor, on the explicit grounds that the same fate is coming for everyone giving the order. That last principle is the whole chapter compressed into an instruction. Nobody in that formation is administering someone else's misfortune. They are all looking at their own future and deciding in advance how they would like it handled. What Sanguinius would make of it. There is a version of this story that ends in reconciliation, and it is worth saying plainly that the material does not support one. Sanguinius did not make peace with the Flaw. He hid it, searched for a cure, failed, killed his own sons when the failure caught up with them, and carried the responsibility for all of it privately until he died. Nothing in the record suggests he ever reached acceptance, and everything suggests he considered the whole thing his fault. And the inheritance he left is the memory of the hour in which he stopped being able to do anything about any of it. That is the cruelest arrangement in this account, and it belongs at the end. The one thing Sanguinius wanted was to spare his sons this condition. What his death did was install it permanently, in a form more total than the version he had been fighting, and make his own last moments the content of the affliction. He is the disease. That is what the Black Rage is. 10,000 years of blood angels have gone mad by becoming their father, and their father spent his life trying to prevent that very outcome. Why they are still worth something. We close on the counterweight, because this series would be dishonest without it. Everything above describes a chapter under a condition it cannot escape. What that chapter has done with the condition is the part that matters. They are among the Imperium's foremost fighting forces, with a record equal to any first founding line, maintained across 10,000 years while losing their best veterans to an affliction on an unpredictable schedule. They produce art of a standard Terra's own artisans acknowledge. They answer calls from their own kin across a galaxy. They have kept a vigil over a body for 100 centuries without interruption. And they have never once, in all that time, decided that the simplest solution to the afflicted would be the quiet one. A chapter cursed with the memory of a good man's death has spent 10,000 years behaving in a manner that man would recognize. The successors, 10,000 years on. Before the accounting closes, the wider bloodline deserves a proper look, because the blood angels are one chapter and the inheritance belongs to a dozen. The flesh tearers are the cautionary case. They carry the identical gene seed and manage it with far less ceremony, and their reputation across the Imperium is one of savagery that borders on the uncontrollable. Their losses among allied forces are a matter of quiet record. Their attrition has brought them near the threshold below which a chapter cannot rebuild itself, and their own commanders have been aware of that trajectory for a long time without being able to alter it. The Lamenters are the strangest case, and the one the wider hobby has adopted with particular affection. For a long period, it was believed they had somehow eliminated the flaws from Sanguinius's gene seed, which would have made them the answer this whole series has been looking for. What they had instead was extraordinary bad luck. Catastrophic, sustained, campaign after campaign, to the point of near annihilation. A chapter that appeared to have escaped the curse was destroyed by circumstance rather than by blood. The angels sanguine keep their faces covered and their affairs private, and the Imperium has never established why. The blood drinkers carry the thirst openly enough to have drawn the kind of attention that ends chapters. The angels penitent gave up the blood rituals and got worse for it, as this series covered earlier. Lay them side by side and one thing emerges. Every strategy has been tried. Heavy ritual, abandoned ritual, concealment, openness, denial, and indulgence. The parent chapter's approach produces the best results anyone has managed, and the parent chapter still loses veterans continuously and still keeps a tower. What nobody has tried. One option remains, and its absence from 10,000 years of history is worth naming. Nobody has proposed retiring the gene line. The Imperium has done this before. Legions have been expunged from record. Chapters have been declared excommunicate traitories and hunted, and gene seed stocks have been condemned for defects far less troublesome than a condition that periodically turns veterans into men who believe they are somebody else. The Blood Angels line has never been seriously threatened with it, and the reasons are worth stating because they explain the chapter's survival better than any account of their combat record. Their gene seed still produces all 19 implants, which many older lines can no longer manage. It grants a lifespan no other Astartes receives. Their loyalty across 10,000 years has never come into question. And their Primarch is venerated across 1,000,000 worlds as the Imperium's foremost martyr, which makes any proposal against his sons a theological problem before it is an administrative one. So the Imperium keeps them, and the chapter keeps managing, and the arrangement holds because every party to it has reasons to leave it where it stands. The thing that never resolves. We close the accounting with what has been missing from all 8 nights. No resolution arrives here. No cure was found. No explanation was confirmed. The origin of the flaw remains disputed between the insanguination rite, a corruption during Sanguinius's transit, an overactive organ, and a deliberate act by the Emperor. Nobody has established which. The 2 men who beat the Black Rage cannot explain how, and one of them says the person who went in did not come out. Sanguinius searched and failed. The apothecarian has studied for 100 centuries and produced management rather than treatment. Call looked at the problem in the 42nd millennium and decided to leave it alone. And the chapter goes on. It recruits from Baal's tribes, makes new Astartes by rites that may be part of the problem, sends them to war, watches them on the eve of battle, paints their armour black when the time comes, and keeps the tower staffed. That is the whole shape of it. A chapter that will never be cured, has never been told why, and has spent 10,000 years handling the consequences with more dignity than the situation requires of them. Good night. On Baal, in the fortress monastery, there is a golden sarcophagus and a body in it that has never been buried. Above it, in a tower, men are crying out. They have been crying out for 100 centuries, and every one of them believes he is the figure in the sarcophagus, and every one of them is living through the same hour of the same battle, in a golden hall a very long way from here. Somewhere in the fortress, chaplains are performing a rite of remembrance on the eve of a battle, and moving down the rows, watching each brother's face for the moment his eyes change. And somewhere in the same building, a man in a golden death mask made in his father's likeness has been awake for 1100 years, refusing an appetite that has never stopped asking, waiting for an ending nobody will give him. They call it the Flaw. Good night, my friend.